touched the walls of a city streets and didn't explain, sadly showed us our ways. I've never asked him why. Cast down, it was heaven sent, and to the church, no intent to repent. On my knees, just to cry. Until you travel to that place you can't come back, where the last pain is gone and all that's left is black. Gray nights he's coming to me, and someday they'll punish my deeds and they'll find all the crimes. But then they ask when they're gonna see them. Then they're gonna ask to feel the ghosts, the walls, the dreams. Well, I've got mine. At last those coming came, and they never looked back.
This is a story that could have happened to anyone, but that it happened so long ago, where details often get shrouded by one's own memory, it seems all the more difficult to fully comprehend. The Whirlwind Wonderland Carnival of Mysteries was once an actual place that existed wherever it happened to settle. The constant pounding noise of stakes being driven into the ground and tents being set up on the outskirts of some new town was the memory I'd had stored in my head all these years. Me and my circus performer parents traveling around the country in every which direction in the mid-1950s. I had only been 12 years old, living amongst some of the most interesting and strange people anyone could have possibly imagined. It was no ordinary childhood, but the stuff of dreams and fantasies, one that was completely real, a series of oddities and wonders that were clearly visible in the flesh. One of my best friends back in those days was a midget named Benoit, who was kind of like the unnamed leader amongst the troupe of carnies and sideshow freaks my parents lived and performed with. My parents had me when they were quite young, so it only made sense for them to raise me as their only child, in order to nurture some sense of normalcy, even amongst the rather frightening curiosities that existed within the whirlwind. In those days, I remember being outside after my parents would perform their trapeze act, witnessing a full dome of stars in the night sky, with fireflies swarming in packs amongst the fields of hay, where the carnival had moved in the spring of 1958. Teen idols had been all the rage back then. You had Elvis, of course, but one of my favorite songs had been sung by none other than Patti Page. In that year, 58, her song, Another Time, Another Place, had been a hit on the radio. I'd sit in one of the old jalopies parked next to the setup crews, just daydreaming about being in another place, other than where I was at the moment. I'd sit there sometimes all day, as the others would be busy either setting up or taking down the tents to head into the next town. I swear, whenever that song still comes on the hit parade show in my hometown during the evenings, it brings back that very specific memory. Mostly of my beloved parents, who were murdered that summer by the dark, shadowy figure known as Reinhard Vogel, the hypnotist.
Another time, another place, we'll be together again. This kiss, this same embrace will be more wonderful there.
I can vividly remember the day of the murder, the events in all of their fine detail, as if it were programmed to run continuously in my head, like a rerun. My father, who was once a vaudeville dancer, was now a carnival hand after suffering an accident on stage. He would help set up my mother's equipment, as he did that very afternoon of the murders. As my mother was preparing for her death-defying walk on the high-flying trapeze, my father got the news that someone wanted to meet with him. Benoit, the midget, came with the news that a man known as Reinhard Vogel was waiting for him near the Whirlwind Funhouse of Mirrors, right next to our carnival wagon. My father had a perplexed and shocked look on his face. It was the kind of look that something dreadful had finally caught up with him, a moment that could only be described as pure terror. For no one that day could possibly fathom what was about to happen, but that it would change the course of life for everyone within the show. The Whirlwind Carnival of Mysteries would never be the same, and eventually disbanded a few years after my parents' untimely deaths. As for Reinhard Vogel, he was never heard from or seen again. What my father was unaware of in that moment was that he was purposefully being lured into an area that was away from all of the commotion taking place that evening before the nightly performances. The Whirlwind Funhouse of Mirrors, where our wagon had been located, was shut down and in need of repairs. So, from my recollection of the events that unfolded that evening, that area of the carnival was mostly vacant. I followed behind my father without him knowing, just out of curiosity, when I had heard about the strange man who had summoned him. The scene which unfolded that evening left me traumatized, feeling numb, and later in life I developed serious trust issues, mostly with male figures and those within positions of authority. To see the hypnotist, the man known as Reinhard Vogel, strangle my father near our circus wagon left me in such a state of shock. I couldn't even move. I stood there behind a tent pole while I watched the life being choked out of my father by this psychotic madman. My father fell to the ground like a sack of potatoes, and Vogel must have seen me, for his eyes slowly looked up and pointed in my direction, like daggers, right after letting go of my father. Instead of walking towards me, he fled in a hurry, hiding himself through an entranceway inside the boarded-up Funhouse of Mirrors. All of my instincts told me not to pursue him, that it would be too dangerous. But, like a faded memory, the rest of what unfolded seemed like it never actually happened. I want to wake up from this nightmare and never see his face again. But his face was projected, like that of being on a movie screen. But instead, his face was shown through a series of mirrors, all facing different directions, once inside the Funhouse of Mirrors. His top hat and monocle placed on his left eye were staring viciously at me. He seemed to grin slightly, as if being proud of the fact that he knew of the horror I had just witnessed. As I ran towards the series of mirrors, which eerily looked like something out of a scene from the Grand Old Wizard in The Wizard of Oz, my head got caught in a series of electrical cords which dangled from the ceiling. The rest of what I remember is like a fever dream. I woke up the next day in the hospital, feeling completely devastated and lost. One of the memories I convinced myself that really happened were the electrical cords hanging overhead in the maze of mirrors, touching down upon my skull, which had burned through my hair and scalp. The nurse who attended to me in the hospital said that Benoit had found me that evening, just before the nightly shows had kicked off. She said that I had sustained injuries from being knocked unconscious and not from being electrocuted. They had found some kind of drug in my system that couldn't be identified. Later, I had found out about my mother, that she had also been found dead in the circus wagon along with my father. The hypnotist, Reinhard Vogel, I can still hear his voice in my dreams as he puts me into some trance, one I continue to feel the effects of all these years later. His voice is unmistakable, as well as the pain of losing my parents at such a young age. All I'm left with now are few scattered memories here and there of a place and time. Nothing more.
Greetings. I'm glad you all could make it to the discussion today on the Eve Browning murder case. Thanks to many of you sitting here in this room who've kept this young lady's memory alive through a number of petitions. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice has decided to reopen the case on Eve Browning's untimely death. Now, we've pretty much gone over all the audio recordings that have been sitting around in a vault for the last few decades or so, since about the late 60s. There was a documentary filmmaker by the name of Troy Levinson who was in the process of making a film based off of some of these recordings you just heard. Nothing from any of those recordings really tells us anything about what could have happened to our prime suspect in the Browning murder case. Like a carnival magician, the suspect they refer to as Reinhard Vogel just seemed to have vanished into thin air. One thing that the late Eve Browning did leave behind was a stack of journal entries and other papers that are being carefully sifted through at the moment. We have a few leads, but really have come up with nothing new as of right now. When we go back through some of Eve's journal entries, an answer may very well be found in there. I'm just not certain of anything conclusive at this time. Out here, away from the press conferences and political crap that the job of investigating a high-profile homicide often carries with it, are the prairie winds at night and the faint sound of coyotes off in the distance as I drive along these desolate roads. Driving home that evening, I had begun to think about the Eve Browning press conference from earlier in the day. The countless number of people who knew her parents, some of her extended family, people that in some other time and place would have been labeled a bunch of outcasts. Well, those same outcasts now stood together in their defiance of the man who had taken so much from them. This mysterious character known as Reinhard Vogel had cast a long shadow over countless circus folks who had once performed in a now defunct carnival show called the Whirlwind Wonderland. Who really knows how many people he had actually physically or emotionally traumatized? There was plenty of sharp forensic science now, which could possibly determine how many people he victimized, as the number of people who came forward in the years since the carnival's demise continued to grow exponentially. Those who had a loved one who mysteriously fell ill and died as a result of coming into contact with this man, or by suffering from some strange hallucinations as a result of being put under one of his hypnotic trances. Little did the people in that press conference know was that we had been following a strong lead for months and didn't want to blow our cover or let anything get out about who we were investigating. About a town or so away from where the Eve Browning murder had occurred, the feds were investigating through a surveillance team to keep watch on the day-to-day activities of a potential suspect. An older gentleman by the name of Henry Schultz was the owner and proprietor of the town drugstore, Schultz Drugs. He had been in operation for over 25 years, about the same amount of time when Reinhard Vogel had gone missing after the Browning twins' double murder. An anonymous source had called into the police station there in town over some mysterious illnesses that were happening to many of the local populace. Mostly elderly folks, maybe too old and frail to have the energy to do anything about what was happening to them. All I know is that this man, Henry Schultz, fit the same description that was provided by the endless eyewitness accounts of those who had seen him in the flesh. Henry Schultz wore a monocle over his left eye and looked to be wearing what appeared to be a large toupee, possibly to conceal some of his face. It looks like we were slowly closing in on him, and when the time came, I'd be there to help make the arrest. Right now, all I care about is getting some justice for the family of Eve Browning. I remember the day she was discovered out in an open prairie by a couple of kids who happened to stumble upon her corpse while they were out there messing around. Some crime scenes stick with you in this line of work. Eve's had certainly been one of those for me.
Her eyes were still open when we found her body. One eye looked to be staring straight up, as the other eyeball was pointed downward, the sign of a serious head trauma. It was later discovered through forensic testing that she had died from a serious blow to the head with an unidentified object, but that most of her death had been caused by some kind of toxin found in the body. Something the lab couldn't readily identify without further testing. That one still hits me hard to this day. Just something about the woman's horrified, ghastly look, as if it were forever frozen, as the last thing Eve Browning ever witnessed on this earth.
I know that they are coming for me any day now. After years of hiding out, making my escape from the carnival life into that of a local town druggist has had its benefits. I was able to get married, have kids, live a life that was far removed from the one I had once had. The man known as Reinhard Vogel only exists now in a past life, a time that has long since vanished. In that time, I all but left that identity to slowly fade. But many others have kept him alive. And, well, it seems that my younger indiscretions have caught up with me. My experiments with various people, mostly outcasts, who I thought would be thrown away or forgotten. That is why serial killers will often prey upon the discarded people roaming the streets. Hookers, runaways. They are society's forgotten trash. Perfect beings for one's own disposal. It was that way back in Germany, in the Weimar Republic, long before anyone had really heard of Hitler. Even during World War I and after, a group of mostly intellects and some scientists gathered together in the aftermath of Germany's destruction. Poor and dying downtrodden people were scattered about, and in Munich, where I had come from, there were so many displaced people after the First World War. That seemed like the appropriate time and place to experiment on anyone who seemed vulnerable. Prostitutes, homeless women, and even children could play a part in these drug experiments I was conducting. They were willing to pay a high amount for my successful trance-inducing serum known as the spinner. I really have only cared about one thing, and one thing only: making money. I didn't care about their ideas, and when they tried to recruit me to play an important role during the rise of the Third Reich, I fled Germany for America. That is when I hid myself and changed my name to Reinhard Vogel. I didn't want anyone to know that I was responsible for murdering innocent women and children while still in Germany. The drug took some time to perfect. The carnival life and many of the people I came into contact with became unwilling participants, so I could eventually patent a super powerful drug. It could have been life-changing instead of just life-altering, ending instead in so many deaths. But that is the price you pay as a scientist. Some must be sacrificed, so I never saw it as a problem. As for the Browning girl and her parents, her father owed me a substantial amount of money. There was nothing more to it than that. He didn't have it, so I strangled him. As for her, Eve got too close. She was catching on to my whereabouts, and I just couldn't have that. Besides, I had the perfect life here, running a drugstore, a church deacon on Sundays, and a member of the Rotary Club. It was the perfect disguise. I can hear them now, surrounding this place. I will take some of my own drug. I'd like my exit to be as peaceful as possible. Somewhere in an exotic location, far from anything or anyone. Just endless palm trees and sandy beaches.